We are slaying monsters.
Don't let the ghosts and the ghouls disturb you, darling.
There wasn't ever really a vampire idea in any movie I've ever watched where I was like, that's really clever. Oh, that's a really interesting, unique take.
Actually,
Never.
I think I might make you into a liar here.
Okay.
Midnight Mass.
Yes, that is my favorite. Ugh. Yeah.
If they haven't seen it by now, then
that's their fault.
Yeah, that's their fault. It's been out for years.
Yeah. Okay. You're completely right. That is the best depiction. I honestly, it was such a good depiction that I didn't come to my mind.
Yeah, because it's not really. It's like, is it a vampire? Is it an angel? Yeah.
Like, what is it? Yeah. So I agree with. I think that's it. Yep.
Okay.
Do you have a different one?
So classical vampire. I think I gotta go with Christopher Lee. I'm not sure anybody was a better classical vampire Dracula, like with the cloak and all of that shit than Christopher Lee. But if we're talking just any vampire depiction as interesting or whatever, Spike.
Oh, Spike. Yeah, he's great.
Yeah. Because Spike he does tick a lot of the classical vampire boxes if you think about it. He doesn't have a cloak, but he has like a leather trench coat. Yeah. It's like kind of cloakish, you know? And also he just has an incredible arc throughout his appearances throughout Buffy. And just, I think he's really wonderful.
I think you're absolutely right. And now that you're getting my mind working a little bit on this, I will add one more.
Okay.
What was his name in Preacher?
Cassidy.
Cassidy
was cool too. One of the favorite moments in Preacher. Now I've only seen I think the first season of the series, so I'm not talking about the series. I'm talking about the comic book. One of the first moments in that is there's a book about Cassidy's history, and he goes and he meets this vampire who is like all dressed in the classical vampire way. He's got the cloak. He's like drinking blood from a chalice and shit. And Cassidy's like, what the fuck is wrong with you?
Yeah. Yeah.
I just want a beer. You know?
Yeah, man. It's so awesome.
Yeah, his contempt for that was really great. And that's kind of, Spike is a little bit that way too.
Yeah.
You know, his contempt for vampire culture, it feels really good in a genre where a lot of times it's very stereotypical and it's very like, oh, okay, well, now we're going to talk about the Vampire High Council again and all of that stuff. So, yeah.
If I never hear about another High Council vampire thing, I'll be very, very happy. I love undermining the vampire lore. Yeah,
the lore, the tropes.
I think it's so awesome. Anytime you can undermine, that's in the recent horror novel I finished and I'm currently shopping around trying to find an editor for. It's all, undermining the vampire lore.
Anybody want to buy
not to plug my manuscript, but yeah, I love that stuff. That's the kind of stuff that gets me excited is anytime you can undermine. So
totally.
Yeah.
Well,
good questions.
We are not going to undermine today. We are going to do the opposite. We are going to overmine. We are going to overmine because we are going to talk about the most stereotypical take on vampires that you can imagine. So stereotypical that you're going to say, holy shit, that can't be real.
Yeah. You're going to be offended for vampires.
Please, nocturnal Americans.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Although I guess these would be the nocturnal British.
Yes, exactly. By the way, we're slaying monsters. We got Maddie J.
Yo.
And I'm EJ. And we're going to go into part 2 of the Highgate Vampire saga.
The saga, the legend, the lore of the Highgate Vampire.
Very good.
All right, so when we last left, our intrepid vampire hunter, David Farrant, he had resolved to spend a night in the Highgate Cemetery. His paranormal group, the British Psychic and Occult Society, had been getting reports of strange happenings there, from red-eyed figures hypnotizing shadows that cause disorientation and memory loss. Farrant, who was a practicing Wiccan, he didn't quite know what he was up against, but he was determined to find out. But to do that, he would need to spend a night at ground zero of the paranormal encounters, the crumbling and dilapidated Highgate Cemetery. Remember, this was one of the Magnificent Seven. They had gone into disrepair because essentially, cemeteries, they're not profitable after a point. You pay for all of those grave sites, that generates money, and theoretically you have built your cemetery economy well enough that the cost of a grave covers the cost of maintenance over several years, maybe several decades. But ultimately, they run out of money because they run out of space, which is exactly what happened here. So it sounds creepy, this idea of spending a night in a cemetery, but it's not as unusual as it might seem at first glance. For Wiccans, Satanists, or any of these other darker fringe groups, this kind of legend tripping is actually pretty ordinary. Are you familiar with that phrase, legend tripping?
No, it's new to me.
Okay. Yeah, so legend tripping, it's the phrase that anthropologists and folklorists use to refer to an almost ritualistic practice. These participants, often teenagers or adolescents, they will travel at night to a place that's either supposedly haunted or was maybe the site of a murder or a horrific event. Could be real, could be apocryphal. Mm-hmm. They might sneak into an abandoned building like Waverly Hills Sanitarium in Kentucky, or cross the Goatman Bridge in Texas. There was just an episode on that, what was the Hulu show? Crimes of the Paranormal. There was just an episode on that. Or you might camp out in the Bradley Woods in the UK in search of the ghostly black lady.
And they're called legend trippers?
Yes. Yeah, you're going on a legend trip.
Why can't they, why isn't there a show called this? Because this is awesome, and this is exactly what ghost hunters do.
Well, it is.
It's a cool name for a show, Legend Trippers.
Yeah, in a way, all ghost hunting is legend tripping. Mm-hmm. I mean, and so is, going to a haunted attraction. Mm-hmm. Or going on a ghost tour somewhere, mm-hmm. It's a fundamentally common human practice. It's like that push and pull of the unknown, the rebellion against your fear and testing your limits and maybe testing other people's limits too. That's so common that oh yeah, we'll go in that room. We'll lock you in that room. Mm-hmm. Everything they do to Aaron on Ghost Adventures.
I know, right, exactly.
But to David Farrant, he wasn't going on a legend trip. This, to him, was almost a police-like investigation. He viewed himself as an occult detective, one of the few people who were taking these reports seriously. They felt that no one else was putting any truth and any real investigation behind the reports of weird events in Highgate Cemetery. And he thought he was the only one who had the magical training and the supernatural experience to handle whatever was lurking there.
Okay.
He kind of thought he was Dean Winchester, basically.
What a fun life. It must be so fun to wake up every day confident that you are the one standing between the gates of hell and the earth.
Well, he was a Wiccan practitioner. Mm-hmm. He ran his own coven. He was I'm this guy, and then these reports come in. He's like, this is my moment. This is the time for David Farrant to protect the world. That's what he thought.
Yeah. I wish I could make myself believe this exciting stuff. My life would be so much more exciting.
And so, on December 21st, 1969, David Farrant donned his signature double-breasted duster and stalked into the cemetery. In his later account, written in his Beyond the Highgate Vampire, he claimed to be skeptical of the spiritual activity and assumed, quote, it might just be an animal or someone dressed up messing around. So even there, he claims, I wasn't sure. Going in, I wasn't sure. If you read the reporting around this time, not his later account, though, he's pretty convinced that there's something occult going on there, something supernatural.
Okay.
So for a few hours, nothing happened. He just kind of shivered in the cold December air. But around midnight, something caught Farrant's attention. He said, I caught sight of a figure about 7 feet tall that appeared to be floating just above the ground. I saw its face and 2 points of intense red light. The area turned cold, as if I'd stepped into a refrigerator. The figure seemed to be draining me of energy, and I felt I was losing control of my normal faculties. It felt like a vivid dream, like I wanted to wake up, but I couldn't.
Okay, it was probably an owl.
Okay, Joe Nickel.
I mean, okay, red eyes, it's big, it's long, which they tend to be.
Sure.
Midnight.
Yeah.
And, I mean, he's waiting, he's scared, he's like revving up. Anything he sees is going to be scary now.
And this is one of the things that we talk about a lot, right?
Yeah.
It's the presence of mind that you're in when you're doing the thing.
That's a big deal. That's a huge part of any of this stuff, is what mindset are you in?
Absolutely. Absolutely. It's one of the things that happens a lot of times in these ghosted investigations where you are trying to do spiritual communication and you get voices and you interpret them as spirits because you're trying to do spiritual communication.
Yes, and I think there's something to be said for, are you physically uncomfortable? Because right. I think there's an element of stress, physical stress, that influences the mind. If you're in a wonderful area and you're warm and cozy and you have your like little cookies with you and whatever in your tea, you're going to be less likely to be frightened by something.
Are you saying that no one gets EVPs in a spa?
I would argue that doesn't happen.
To Farrant, this malicious figure was psychically attacking him. Much like in the previous story, the one that had inspired him to go to the cemetery in the first place, he felt disoriented, he felt dizzy, as if he was hypnotized, under the thrall of a vampire, if you will. Mm-hmm. But luckily, Farrant had training in the occult arts.
I can just see him doing backflips over the gravestones and like... training. That's right. I've got training. And then he just like starts to do tumbles and...
That would be amazing. It was not nearly as cool as that. According to him, he realized he was in danger and defended himself by mentally reciting a, quote, Kabbalistic incarnation to repel evil forces.
Good.
And this Doctor Strange-style defense worked, and the red-eyed attacker vanished. Now freed of its psychic thrall, Farrant had no choice but to conclude that the reports were, in fact, true. Something dangerous was stalking the cemetery, something with the power to control a person's mind. A vampire. At least, according to David Farrant. Yeah. And I don't want to automatically jump on the Joe Nickel bandwagon, mm-hmm. But sometimes it's hard not to, mm-hmm. you know?
Yeah.
A red-eyed creature hanging out 7 feet above the ground sounds an awful lot like a British barn owl to me. Mm-hmm. Barn owls, they have the red eye shine. And if you have an owl that's perched on a tree stump, or say a mausoleum column, or like a fence post, could easily be 6-7 feet above the ground, 6-7 feet tall, according to Farrant. Mm-hmm. And without feet or shoes, you'd only be able to see the face and a vague form of the body that the tree or the column forms. Mm-hmm. Owls, as they're holding their wings down, they look vaguely like the lapels of a jacket. Mm-hmm. So it's not hard to see how that could have been misinterpreted. In terms of the psychic attacks, that's harder to dispute because, I mean, we have no evidence of it. Mm-hmm. It was December, so it's not really that surprising that it was cold. And seeing something scary in the dark with red eyes, as you pointed out, it's going to scare somebody, like no matter what. Yeah. And if you're someone who's used to practicing magic and running around in occult circles and already have heard stories of people being hypnotized, it's not surprising that that might push you to a more supernatural explanation than something more realistic. Mm-hmm. But despite these more mundane explanations, Farrant became convinced that he had narrowly survived a vampire attack. He wrote his encounter in a letter to the local newspaper, the Hampstead and Highgate Express, adorably nicknamed the Ham and High.
Aw.
If there is not a combined butcher shop and dispensary in Highgate, I think I found my next business.
Wow, it should be high in ham because you get the munchies after you get high.
And then just sell pork rinds.
Yeah. That is probably the food of choice.
Right.
For people.
I like it.
It's a good idea. And if they opened it next to the cemetery would get more foot traffic, and maybe they could collab with the cemetery.
Okay.
And the cemetery could get money and pay to clean themselves up.
Oh, I was waiting for you to make another pun related to the ham and high and something.
No. I'm just trying to help the cemetery.
Oh, you just want the cemetery to get cleaned up.
Yeah. I just want to help the cemetery.
Sure.
Very, thoughtful like that.
I once had a roommate who, every time he got stoned, would clean our apartment. And so it was the most wonderful thing in the world.
Yeah. That is really cool.
I always knew when I would come back and he had been like at a party, and I would come back home and see him like vacuuming. I was like, "Oh, you're stoned, aren't you?" He was like, "Yeah." Now, I'm sure you're wondering, why vampire? Why not a more traditional parapsychological explanation like a ghost or a spirit?
Yeah.
Why something that has exactly zero evidence in the real world?
You could argue ghosts have zero evidence in the real world. But it's more outlandish.
Yeah, it's way more outlandish.
Yeah.
I mean, we have entire shows dedicated to ghost hunting. There's a legion of books dedicated to ghost hunting. There are very, very, very few books on vampire hunting.
It's no longer in our culture to believe in vampires the way that we believe in ghosts.
Right.
So, yes, it is a strange thing to jump to. Yeah.
So part of that comes from the Hammer horror films, which were very popular at the time. We talked a little bit about them in the last episode. Hammer was in the middle of a horror boom and was capitalizing on it by unleashing a Dracula franchise. Starting with Dracula in 1958, starring Christopher Lee as the titular vampire and Peter Cushing as the dashing and heroic Dr. Van Helsing. The success of that movie launched follow-ups, The Brides of Dracula in 1960, Dracula Prince of Darkness in 1966, and Dracula Has Risen from the Grave in 1968. A fifth movie was in the works, slated for release in May of 1970, titled Taste the Blood of Dracula.
Interesting titles.
Yeah, it's funny because they started out being more mundane, more expected, and then they get longer and longer and longer as you go.
Yeah, they start to sound like a literary novel.
or an ad campaign. You're like, taste the blood of Dracula with your morning breakfast.
Right, exactly. Or The Girl Who Tasted the Blood of Dracula.
Well, that's the literary book.
Yeah.
Yeah, the girl who took the train to taste the blood of Dracula.
Yeah, there you go. And what she saw on the train.
Obviously, this cultural popularity pushed vampires to the forefront of British occult consciousness. The other cause of the vampire connection stemmed from a population of wild foxes that lived amongst the tombs of Highgate Cemetery. Not that the foxes were vampires, but foxes were living there. Mm-hmm. And when Farrant returned to the site of his own psychic attack in the days that followed, he found a dead fox in that spot. There were no outward traces of injury, save from a pair of puncture wounds.
Oh my God.
You're rolling your eyes. What's
the owl was hunting the fox. That's what the owl was there for. Oh my God.
I mean, you're getting a little bit ahead of me.
I'm sorry to get ahead of you. I'm sorry.
No, I mean, absolutely.
This is not hard to put together, though. But okay. I'm sorry.
So now...
This is not an indictment of you. This is an indictment of this guy. Okay.
I'm trying to unfold this story in a very poetic way, and you're just like, yeah, I'll get the fox.
I'm sorry.
Okay.
Shut up!
Now more resolute than ever, Farrant believed that the monsters he encountered had to be a vampire. What other creature had the power of hypnotic control and would prey on the blood of animals?
I can't think of anything.
And so in something of David Farrant's defense, right? Dracula in the Hammer horror movies was often depicted with these glowing red eyes as he was doing the hypnotism. And so you can kind of see how that might be something that he would spring to if he was looking for a supernatural explanation.
Yeah, I mean, I don't blame him. He's in that headspace. He's doing what he knows is the best thing to do with what makes sense to him.
Precisely.
So I understand to a degree why he's come to these conclusions. Yes.
In a March 6th article in the Ham and High titled, "Why Do the Foxes Die?" Farrant says, quote, "Several other foxes have also been found dead in the cemetery. Much remains uncertain, but what I have recently learned all points to the vampire theory as being the most likely answer." That was the sound of EJ slapping their head. Slapping their forehead.
Sorry.
The Picard face palm.
Yeah, exactly.
Oh, no.
Exactly.
The next section of my script is, although Farrant didn't know it at the time, there's a likely explanation for the sudden deaths of the foxes in Highgate.
Should we just skip that?
Well, there's a couple things at play here that we can talk about, though. Mm-hmm. By the 1970s, it's important to realize that feral fox populations had grown out of control in London. The Natural History Museum of London says foxes had been documented in Britain's southern urban areas since the 1930s. The expansion of these areas during the interwar period created an ideal new habitat with an abundance of food. Attempted culls have proved unsuccessful. In the 1970s, London boroughs were responsible for their resident foxes. In Bromley, a fox control officer killed 300 foxes a year, but made no dent in the population.
Are they native to the area?
They are, but not in these types of populations. So essentially what happened is, as London was expanding in the post-World War I, post-World War II period here, you had fox populations just spring completely out of control. There's more trash. There's more mice, which means there's more things for the foxes to eat. And Highgate is this perfect place because, it was designed to be this gigantic garden.
Yeah.
So it's an optimal habitat to begin with. It becomes even more optimal as it becomes disused and people leave trash there. The trash attracts rodents, attracts squirrels, which the foxes eat. Maybe the foxes eat the trash as well, all this stuff. Nobody cares that they're there. They're not hunting them. Mm-hmm. So it's long been known that there was a population of foxes living in Highgate Cemetery. Now, in addition to the booming fox population, a 1979 article in the Finchley Press interviewed an actual veterinarian named Graham Newsom, who studied the case of the dead fox in Highgate. Newsom concluded that the supposed fang marks on the fox were in fact puncture wounds, likely caused either by the teeth of a dog, like a German Shepherd, or by the talons of an owl. He also noted that canines had been responsible for attacking local rabbit and goat populations at the time. So, wild dogs, wild owls, not wild vampires. And they had easy prey since the fox populations were out of control.
Yeah, their populations were probably booming too.
Of course they were. It's a cycle, right?
Yeah.
Now, Farrant's article on the foxes in the Ham and High caught the attention of one man in particular, a bishop named Patrick Sean Manchester. Hailing from Sherwood Forest, Manchester grew up roaming through the dark woods and reading biblical tales and horror fiction.
This guy had the best life.
Even though it seems like those two are really incongruous, right?
I mean, yes, but also, dude, getting to grow up in Sherwood Forest and run around and play Robin Hood and stuff. Like, oh my God.
It's crazy, dude. Yeah.
I know a dude who lived in Sherwood Forest.
Yeah?
In one of my jobs a long time ago.
Okay. Was it beautiful?
Yes.
Yeah.
He's a very nice dude. It's his wife's home, his wife's family home, and they have this like gorgeous stone, it's like a little castle in Sherwood Forest. he showed me pictures of it, and I'm just like, okay, I'm going to go back to my depressing little apartment in Philadelphia and try to have a good time.
Wash the bum poop off my front step. Okay, here we go.
Yeah, which we have done twice. Twice. Yes,
Yeah.
I'd rather be playing Robin Hood in Sherwood Forest. That's for sure.
In Manchester's memoir, he says, "My father introduced me to Edgar Allan Poe, and my mother introduced me to Saint Teresa of Avila." Although I haven't found it expressly stated anywhere, it's pretty clear that Manchester was a huge fan of Bram Stoker's Dracula, too, since he wrote a fan fiction sequel in 2000 titled Carmel, A Vampire Tale.
Aw.
This is fucking real. He wrote this, like, Tara Gillespie level fan fiction. It's out of print, which I think is the greatest tragedy of this entire series.
I'm really sad to hear that.
But this dichotomy of literature certainly guided his path, you know. Manchester, spurred on by what he considered, quote, morally bankrupt times. That's how he viewed the world around him, morally bankrupt. He chose to join the priesthood to combat what he saw as like the erosion of Christian values. And remember, this is the swinging 60s. This is Austin Powers England, where sex and drugs are the topics of the day. So you take that, you combine that with newly legalized witchcraft, happened a decade prior to this, and you can see how a devout believer like Manchester feels that his faith that he was raised with is being left behind in the pursuits of the devil.
Yeah, you can kind of argue that the whole world was ending. Like, it was just
To him,
becoming this,
yeah.
like, hedonistic apocalypse.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's how he sees it. And then also, you know, I'm not tremendously familiar with the geography and landscape of England, but he's definitely coming from a more rural environment. You know, so no matter what, this is not London in Sherwood Forest, right?
Right. Yeah.
So he is about to move to London to take up his seminary studies, and it rocks his world and his perception of the world. He gets a real culture shock from doing so. So the 1960s found Manchester in London studying theology and kind of laying the groundwork for his future, because he wants to be an exorcist.
That's cool. All right.
Yeah. And you can see how, like, he believes if you have this current trend of this shagadelic behavior that's going on, the world is going to turn into one of Poe's stories, one of these stories he grew up reading. He got both sides. Like he got the Christianity, the light, and then he got Poe and Dracula and the dark monsters as well.
Perfect for an exorcism.
Absolutely. And he buys into all of this. It's all real to him.
So he sees that groove is in the heart, and he must extricate it.
Yeah. Yes. If groove is in the heart, you must drive a stake through it.
Exactly. Exactly.
He doesn't join the Exorcists, the Order of Exorcists, until 1973, but he's already drawing these battle lines between good religious warriors and the forces of darkness. Like, I'm writing the opening for his TV show right now, you know?
Yeah.
He's really making himself the Van Helsing of his own story. Which, if you think about it, isn't that dissimilar to what David Farrant's doing, too?
Totally.
You know, David Farrant was this Wiccan expert. I keep comparing him to Doctor Strange. Like, he's this master of mysticism and the occult, and he's also battling the forces of darkness. And so they're doing it together, but they're coming from different backgrounds.
Okay.
And different sects, different tenets, right? And what a foil Sean Manchester has now, as he's reading this article on these dead foxes that says a vampire's killing these foxes in Highgate. Yeah. He became convinced that the evil uprising he'd feared was actually finally happening. And even worse, it was centered on Highgate Cemetery. But it wasn't the hypnotic, red-eyed monsters that Farrant was afraid of. It was the cabal of witches that were camped out there at night, conducting their satanic rituals.
One is more real than the other.
But yeah, to Sean Manchester, David Farrant and the British Psychic and Occult Society are the real threat. They're the real monster.
Oh, damn. This is like the little fish swimming and the medium fish going after the little fish, and then the big fish going after the medium fish.
Well, so Manchester looks at all of what they're doing and all of these investigations that Farrant and his society are now conducting in the cemetery. Plus, you have your regular legend trippers that are going there for a laugh. Mm-hmm. And he sees all of that as creating the metaphysical breeding ground to summon the vampire. Mm. So he thinks that all of this black magic, occult arts stuff that's happening is actually calling the vampire to that spot.
Yeah.
It's so much of this is so Buffy the Vampire Slayer. Mm-hmm. Like, Farrant's there, he's conducting all of his magic and witchcraft, and he's gonna hunt it down. You got Manchester swooping in. He's like, oh my god, you've opened a hellmouth here. All these creatures of darkness are coming out. Yeah.
Man.
So, taking it upon himself, Manchester reached out to one of the people who had seen mysterious figures in the cemetery. The most exciting of these, at least to the bishop, was the account of Elizabeth Wotewa, a 16-year-old student at La Sainte Union Convent near Highgate. While walking home one night, Wotewa and a friend passed the Highgate Cemetery, and they stopped in their tracks, unable to believe their eyes. According to one of Manchester's many blogs, because for some, when blogging culture started, he was just like, oh boy, and then he started a whole bunch, and maybe he forgot passwords for some of them, but there's like 6 different Sean Manchester blogs. Anyway.
I understand his pain.
This is a quote from one of them.
Yeah.
We both saw the scene of graves directly in front of us, and the graves were opening up, and the people were rising. We were not conscious of walking down the lane. We were only conscious of this graveyard scene. She's describing graves being ripped open and zombies or ghosts staggering out of them.
They both had the same, hallucination, I guess?
The 2 girls?
Yeah.
That's... are you trying to come up with a skeptical opinion of what happened?
Oh, no, I'm just asking. These 2 girls both hallucinated the same thing.
Manchester claims that they both saw the same thing.
Yeah.
Yes.
Wow. That's a really interesting thing.
Yeah, it's wild, right? And it really doesn't make a whole lot of sense.
No.
It could have been their imagination running wild, but I don't really think it is. And we'll come back to that later. But for now, let's just continue with Manchester's research and his terrifying conclusions regarding Wotewa. So understandably, she's plagued by nightmares because, this is terrifying. She saw bodies coming out of graves. But she also dreamed of a creature with glaring eyes and pointed teeth that she claimed sometimes peered into her window.
Ooh.
Barely sleeping, Manchester finds her listless and pale. 2 weeks later, Wotewa's boyfriend summoned Manchester again. Her condition had worsened, leaving her completely bedridden. He said, she is withering away at such a rate that she is only just barely alive. She is being overcome by something. Worse still were the 2 marks on the side of her neck that Manchester found, both raised and inflamed spots with distinct puncture marks in the center. The bishop raced to her aid. This was exactly what he had feared and what he had spent his life training for. Manchester conducted a vampire-themed exorcism, using a silver cross and sprinkling Wotewa with holy water.
When you said a vampire-themed exorcism,
yeah.
I kind of imagine him going to the CVS and looking for vampire things, little, those little bats you can string up and tape along the wall, and all right, what else can I do here?
You mean like a pony-themed birthday?
Exactly.
A vampire-themed exorcism.
Exactly. Yes, he's bringing in all the things. He's handing out the plastic teeth for everybody to wear.
So he chanted prayers, he applied garlic and salt, which kind of makes me wonder if it's hard to be a vampire in Italy. And finally, after days of repeated treatments, the girl's color returned and she found herself freed of the supernatural attachment that affected her.
Good.
So, EJ, is this story true?
No.
No, not at all. And not according to Donald Ecker, the host of Dark Matters podcast and contributor to the Paracast. In his paper titled My Inquiry into the Highgate Vampire, Ecker revealed that Wotewa's boyfriend was a good friend of Manchester's named Keith McLean. In a phone interview with an unnamed correspondent, Wotewa claimed that the whole incident was made up, quote, for a laugh, and that the bite marks were drawn on her with a marker.
Okay, I mean, that's kind of the only explanation I could have come up with, is that they were all in on it.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And we're going to come back to this later on when we talk about the publications that these two guys do, recounting their stories of the Highgate Vampire. But it's really interesting because in the first edition of Manchester's book, you have a picture of her with her bitten neck. And then in subsequent editions, that picture is gone. And it's really, really hard to find. And so that's not the kind of thing that somebody would do if that was a completely honest and authentic encounter.
Right.
Right. All of that means Manchester was probably in on it too. You know, the thing is, that story, that's not even the most outrageous vampire story that Sean Manchester had. Take the account of Lucia, who just so happens to be named like Lucy of Dracula. According to Manchester's book, she also fell under the thrall of the vampire and would walk to his grave at night. Following her one night, he was astonished when she shifted form before his eyes, transforming into a giant spider.
Ooh, cool.
He leapt into action and staked the spider, ending Lucia's life as well. So he murdered this girl.
That's not nice.
And then he buried her in the Great Northern Cemetery. Now, I probably don't have to point out that that's some kind of D&D inspired crazy. Obviously, that never happened, and there's proof of that, too. Donald Ecker inquired with law enforcement officers about missing persons and deaths under mysterious circumstances, because being staked while being a spider certainly seems like that's a mysterious circumstance. But during his investigation, he came across no one missing from the time named Lucia. But he did come across an interview with David Farrant, who said that Lucia was an alias and the woman's name was actually Jacqueline Cooper. Now, Jacqueline Cooper was still alive and well. She had not been staked while being a vampire.
Good.
Interestingly enough, however, Cooper was named in Sean Manchester's divorce proceedings as being a co-respondent, or someone called to give testimony.
Oh, okay.
So it seems likely that Cooper was either having an affair with Manchester or his wife suspected that she was. And we will talk about all of this later when it matters a lot.
Okay.
So anyway, these are the cases that Manchester is saying, clearly there's a vampire here. Elizabeth Wotewa and Jacqueline Cooper, or Lucia, they've never publicly come forward despite repeated attempts by investigators on both sides to confirm their story. The only source we have of the vampire disease, the spider incident, all that stuff, is Sean Manchester himself. It's worth pointing out that the whole thing is basically copy-pasted from Mina Harker's attacks by Dracula, wandering to the cemetery, like following in his thrall, all the way down to the exorcisms, the garlic, her obsession, you know. And the spider is, I mean, I don't know what to say about the spider. The spider's fucking crazy.
It's a great idea. I mean, it's very creative and I appreciate it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't know.
I don't know. You know what I think is his wife was like, I see you hanging out with this Jacqueline person a lot and I don't like it. And he says, I didn't even know. She's under my thrall. I'm under her thrall. And then he says, well, darling wife, I took care of that one night. She's gone. Yeah.
She turned into a spider and I killed her.
Yep.
I don't know. The greater problem to that might be that there is video proof of Sean Manchester having an affair with Jacqueline Cooper. But we will talk about that in the next episode.
Whoa!
Yeah, can't get too far ahead of ourselves
Okay,
here.
we will not.
Anyway, these incidents drove Sean Manchester to action. Because to him, there's no denying what he holds as the truth. Highgate Cemetery is the home to a vampire, and it is preying on the residents of this sleepy little neighborhood. And as a bishop and an exorcist in training, he's the only one who can stop it. Again, that's just like David Farrant. Mm-hmm. Like, they're the same person.
Yeah.
You know? Manchester contacted the press regarding his experiences with the girls. And on February 27th, 1970, the front page of the Ham and High bore the headline, "Does a Vampire," like not vampire, but the old spelling, Wampyr, "does a Vampire walk in Highgate?"
That's cool.
The obvious answer is no, it rides a ghost bicycle. Remember the ghost bicycle from the old one, from the last episode?
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
In the article, Manchester says, "The phenomena reported by Highgate people in letters to Ham and High is not merely the apparition of an earthbound spirit, which is relatively harmless, but much worse, that of a vampire. Or, as is more popularly known, a vampire." Thanks, buddy. Okay, great. The article goes on to detail Manchester's increasingly bizarre theories about the creature. You ready for this?
I'm so ready.
This is what he thinks they're up against. The king vampire of the undead, originally a nobleman who dabbled in black magic in medieval Wallachia, somewhere near Turkey, walks again. His followers eventually brought him to England in a coffin at the beginning of the 18th century and bought a house for him in the West End. His unholy resting place is Highgate Cemetery. And now there is so much desecration of graves by Satanism, I'm convinced that this has been happening in Highgate Cemetery in an attempt by a body of Satanists to resurrect the king vampire.
Wow, that is a great plot. That sounds like it came right out of What We Do in the Shadows.
I know, right?
Can you imagine these vampires bumbling along from Turkey to England, being like, "We must have a pretty place for this boy to lay, for our king vampire boy to be."
Yeah, and then they hire Satanists, but it turns out that the Satanists just like go to the graveyard and get high and don't actually do any magical rituals at all.
Right.
You know?
And they work with this like real estate guy who's like really like he wants to put them in a nice place, but they're like, "I want a shitty place."
Yeah, what's up with that too? Why do vampires always have these like decrepit, crumbling places? Don't you want like a nice place?
I would think that they could afford it. I mean, if they've been hanging out with the king vampire in Wallachia for hundreds of years, they can afford any. Like, they could do it.
I mean, I get it. But then again, you know, we always assume that vampires are good with their money. Mm-hmm. They may not be.
They might not be good.
This is a little bit in your book.
Oh, yeah, it
Vampires who are terrible with their money.
With their money.
Like, oh,
exactly.
I've been alive for centuries, but I don't really have money anymore.
Right.
I spent it all on bad investments.
Right. It's another subversion. It's like, yeah. I'm sick of the rich vampire trope. Anyway.
In this article, in a burst of conspiracy theorist insight, Manchester heads off the naysayers. He knows he's going to be compared to Dracula. You know, this recently resurrected fictional monster. Because everybody's seeing these Hammer vampire movies, right? Mm-hmm. So he claimed that Bram Stoker's book was true, or was at least based on actual events. This is a real quote. Bram Stoker's novels are based on facts, what people told him they had heard.
Okay. So witness accounts aren't necessarily completely solid evidence, but that's fine. I mean, whatever. That sounds fun. That's a good life to live. It's a good belief.
It makes me think of the moment in Aqua Teen Hunger Force where Shake is like, the Highlander wasn't a documentary and the events happened in real time.
Yes, exactly.
And okay, so like, he's not entirely wrong.
No.
But he's wrong enough that everything he said was bullshit. You know?
Well, I mean, you can go back to medieval history and talk about how, I mean, people really believed that vampires were real and they would tell real stories about it.
Let's do just that.
Okay.
Let's start with Dracula, right? Mm-hmm. Dracula, I'm sure you know, was a real person, but he wasn't a vampire. Just a sadistic psychopath, maybe. And the vampire mythology is fairly robust, fairly well documented, but that doesn't mean it's true any more than stories of, you know, the sun being pulled across the sky in a chariot is true, right?
Yeah.
Now, Vlad III, commonly known as Vlad Tepes or Vlad the Impaler, was a ruler of Romania in the 15th century. He was born in Transylvania and heir to the throne of Wallachia. You say Wallachia?
I say Wallachia.
I say Wallachia.
You say tomato, I say potato, and whatever. Vampire, vampire.
Vampire.
Umpire.
Anyway, he took the moniker of Vlad Dracul. Do you know what that means?
Oh, I used to know.
Vlad Dracul. It means Vlad the Dragon.
That's right.
He took it from his father.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, the Dracul here refers to the Order of the Dragon, which was a military fraternity that essentially opposed the rise of the Ottoman Empire. Very important moment in history. In more modern Romanian, Dracul has kind of come to mean, or at least be associated with the word devil as well.
Oh, interesting.
But originally it was the Order of the Dragon. During his 3 periods of rule, Vlad launched several attacks on the Ottoman Empire. When his father was murdered during an invasion of Hungary, Vlad felt betrayed and conducted sweeping executions intent on removing dissenters from his ranks. And it was during these battles that his legendary cruelty began, with Vlad ordering his victims to be impaled on wooden stakes. As with most of these stories, it's unclear how much of this is truth and how much of it is embellishment from the Saxons following Vlad's arrest and death. Matthias Cornelius, the king of Hungary, who ultimately imprisoned Vlad, did so under suspicious means. You know anything about his arrest and imprisonment?
No.
Okay, cool. See, allegedly, Cornelius produced documents that claimed Vlad intended to attack Hungary if they refused to join him. But modern historians now believe these documents were forged. And whether Cornelius was complicit in these forgeries or not is a matter of debate. So it seems like the modern historical conclusion is that he was imprisoned on false pretenses.
And history is written by the victor. So
exactly,
what can you do?
Yeah. I mean, either way, he was imprisoned and then escaped from that imprisonment and died in battle with the Ottomans in the 1470s. It's alleged that he was so notorious and fiendish that his body was cut into pieces and his head was paraded through the streets of Constantinople. Today, the final resting place of his body is still unknown. He was a victim of war. He died on the battlefield, so he was never given a proper burial. While he has a tombstone in the Snagov monastery in Romania, the grave contains a mixture of bones, including horse jaw bones.
I did know that, yeah. Some of them are his, though, maybe?
We don't know.
I guess they don't know.
It's just a whole bunch of bones. We don't know what's there. It's possible that it was just a mass grave, and they tossed some victims from the war in there, and they just ended up in there.
Yeah.
We really don't know.
Okay.
But after his death, rumors circulated and they grew. They said Vlad set a table after battle and dined in the presence of his victims. Like, he's got the stakes set up all around him and he's dining in that field. They would say he dipped his bread in the blood of his enemies. They said his tears ran red like blood, that he consumed human flesh, all of these things, And of course he impaled everybody, every single person.
He almost tried it with himself too. He's like, wait, I am me.
Hang on.
Hey, wait. He looked in the mirror and he was like, who's that guy? Impale him.
He just has a big red impale button. He just slams over and over again.
Exactly.
Impale. And, Cornelius, for his part, did basically nothing to curb those rumors. And that helped Vlad to gain his reputation as according to a Roman historian, Radu Florescu, a, quote, demented psychopath, a sadist, a gruesome murderer, a masochist.
He very well could have been.
He could be all those things.
He could have been.
Yeah.
I feel like it would have been better if he maintained this story of him being absolutely insane for Cornelius. Is that his name?
Cornelius, yeah.
Because it makes him seem so much more powerful and strong.
Absolutely, right?
Why would you wouldn't say, oh, he was a delicate flower and I totally took advantage of him. He's very much pacifist.
Yeah.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I suspect that, as with most history, the truth is probably somewhere in the middle. Mm-hmm. Like and the thing is, it's too much to go into here, the like real deep depth of his history, mm-hmm. and we'll probably end up doing something specifically on Dracula at some point.
Cool.
But he was betrayed, and his father was killed, and it enraged him, and he didn't know who he could trust, and he had to he had to put his foot down essentially and make a very decisive, grand decision, mm-hmm. Have a show of force. Mm-hmm. And I think that might be the instigating factor for a lot of the rumors. And then, of course, you defeat him and exactly what you said. Nobody wants to be like, yeah, it was pretty easy. It didn't really break a sweat. It took about half an hour,
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, you want to be like, no, he was the greatest monster I've ever seen,
Yes.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Most Romanian historians consider Vlad in a more favorable light. His tyrannical stance toward crimes like murder and rape actually helped to reshape Wallachia into a safer society. Rolandia, a Romanian tourist website, points out that the economy boomed during Vlad's rule thanks to his numerous trade routes and partnerships, including the ill-fated one with Matthias Cornelius.
So it is good to be friends with those you are trading with. Interesting.
Yeah, imagine that,
What an interesting
right?
concept, to be nice to the people you're trading with.
Oh, that's... It's like Monsters is not a political podcast.
Sorry.
But yeah...
sorry, not sorry.
But no, you bring up a good point, though. I mean, if he was just this tyrannical, maniacal ruler, why would you go and have established trade routes? You would just fucking murder everybody and take their land, right?
Exactly.
He
had to play a game. He had to play the game somehow.
Yeah, that's
right?
something that a diplomat does, and automatically that calls into question this concept of Vlad Tepes being this like great grand slaughterhouse. you know. Either way, the popularity of Vlad Dracul's bloodthirsty reputation caught Bram Stoker's eye in the late 1800s, and he published a book that mixed the despot with Romania's popular vampire mythology. Stoker's other influence came from Emily Gerard, a Scottish chronicler of Transylvanian myth. When her husband was stationed in a region while serving in the Austro-Hungarian army, she was bored, and so she immersed herself in local legends. And she wrote a book called Land Beyond the Forest that chronicled all of these legends that she was told by locals, residents, and all that kind of stuff. She said, "More decidedly evil is the Nosferatu, or vampire, in which every Romanian peasant believes as firmly as he does in heaven or hell. Every person killed by a Nosferatu becomes likewise a vampire after death, and will continue to suck the blood of other innocent persons till the spirit has been exorcised by opening the grave of the suspected person and either driving a stake through the corpse or else firing a pistol shot into the coffin." It's interesting because you could just open the coffin and shoot him.
Yeah,
And
that's interesting.
It's not a silver bullet. It's nothing like that. It's just you shoot the vampire. Fascinating.
Yeah.
She continues, "In very obstinate cases of vampirism, it is recommended to cut off the head and replace it in the coffin with a mouth filled with garlic, to extract the heart and burn it, strewing its ashes over the grave." In addition to Gerard's account, Eastern European mythology includes some of my favorite anti-vampire rituals, as described in George Abbott's 1903 book, Macedonian Folklore. I love this. Okay. So See, vampires only come out at night, right? We know this. So that's the time of monsters, ghouls. It's just, that's what it was, right? Mm-hmm. During the day, they slept in their coffins, safe from the sunlight. So in order to stop a vampire, you had to prevent them from rising, or at least obstruct their progress. Corpses would actually be buried face down, assuming that the vampire would awaken and not know which way is up and start digging the wrong way to get out of the grave. And I mean, I guess eventually showing up in China.
That's right. There you go. Because they're not going to die, probably.
No.
So they'll just keep going.
Would be another incredible story.
Oh, yeah.
It takes place in, like, China, and you just have this vampire claw through the soil.
Yeah, I literally dug to China. I feel like the core in the
yeah,
earth
it would melt
burn
the vampire.
you.
Yeah,
For
you
sure.
wouldn't
Make it.
Yeah, you can burn vampires. They die that way.
That'd be a short story. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But that's likely the inspiration for the stake through the heart idea. It wasn't supposed to kill the vampire initially. It was just supposed to pin it in place and prevent it from rising. Mm. But the other thought, and I love this, is you distract the vampire until dawn by providing it a task after it rises. Seeds or grains scattered on the grave would fascinate the vampire, who would be compelled to count each one. If that counting lasted until daybreak, the vampire would have no choice but to return to their coffin and then restart the counting the following night. And if you didn't have seeds or something like that, you could use a broom, because vampires just couldn't resist counting the bristles on your broom. But this is real mythology. It's cool.
Is this why Sesame Street Dracula counts?
I don't think so.
Just because he's called Count Dracula, so he must count things. But
yeah, I don't think that was the reason. I've researched this. I don't think that's the reason. I think it's just because Count Dracula, it's just a play on Count Dracula. And then, of course, they took it literally. Mm-hmm. But I still love that no matter what, it is an accurate detail to Romanian vampire folklore.
Yeah, it's awesome.
Yeah. So Irish author Bram Stoker took the bloodthirsty reputation of Vlad Dracul and combined it with Emily Gerard's vampire myths and legends that she had recounted, and created one of the most recognizable villains in history, Emperor Palpatine.
Yeah, you could argue he's a bit of a vampire.
No, I mean, obviously he created Dracula.
Yes.
And in doing so, established this entire canon of vampire lore. Mm-hmm. So what do we have? He's an ancient undead creature, disguised as a noble. He's driven by an insatiable lust for blood. His victims become vampires if they drink his blood. He has powers of hypnosis and can change form at will, often becoming a bat. He casts no shadow. He has no reflection. Conventional weapons won't harm him. He can fly, or at least hover, scale vertical surfaces with ease. He is repulsed by garlic and religious symbols. Sunlight weakens him, so he spends his days asleep in a coffin filled with earth from his home country. Mm. It's interesting because if you read Dracula, sunlight weakens him, it doesn't kill him. Yeah. So Stoker published Dracula in 1897, inadvertently launching a franchise. 1921 saw the first film adaptation, a silent film called Dracula's Death that premiered in Vienna. A year later, Nosferatu hit German theaters, introducing audiences to Count Orlok, the vampire. This was an unauthorized adaptation. I don't know if you know that.
No, what does that even mean? Who do you have to check in with, the Vampire Council?
Bram Stoker.
Oh.
It was an adaptation of Dracula.
Oh, uh-oh.
But they didn't get authorization from him. And
so Nosferatu was not okay with okay, I got you. Mm-hmm. Okay.
Yeah, wow. That's actually why he's Count Orlok and not Dracula.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
It was, however, so wildly popular that it's sort of been allowed to continue to exist. But yeah. It was also the first time that media showed a vampire dying from sunlight rather than just being weakened by it. Nosferatu dies because of sunlight. And then, of course, less than a decade later, Bela Lugosi portrayed the Count in Todd Browning's Dracula and was the most iconic portrayal of the character. that's where you get the most classic look. He's got his like widow's peak. He's wearing his cloak. You know, all of this depiction. It's interesting to note that Dracula was actually ugly in Bram Stoker's book. And that's probably why Orlok in Nosferatu is also ugly.
Yeah, really scary looking.
Yeah. And it wasn't until Bela Lugosi came on the scene that Dracula became more of a... I mean, he's not necessarily handsome, but there's like a magnetism about him that Bela Lugosi brought.
So the charisma began at that point.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Okay. I bet Nosferatu scared the shit out of people back then.
Oh, it terrified people. Yeah. It was like one of the most terrifying things that had been made. Not that there was that much to compare it to.
But that's why. That's why.
Yeah.
Like, yeah.
So, and then, of course, Bela Lugosi's Dracula launched a nearly endless stream of media, from movies, TV shows, breakfast cereals. Universal Pictures released Frankenstein the same year and actually spawned the world's first cinematic universe from it. That's true, by the way. Like, they were the first ones to have this universe. Wow. You have a new icon in Count Dracula. So all of this makes it even more unbelievable that Sean Manchester, okay, a bishop living in 1960s London, believed that something similar to the legendary villain, the King Vampire, that's what he called it, King Vampire, had been unleashed in Highgate Cemetery by David Farrant and his Satanists. Manchester, I want to just reiterate that this is what Manchester said was going on in Highgate, okay? The King Vampire of the Undead, originally a nobleman who dabbled in black magic in medieval Wallachia, somewhere near Turkey, walks again. His followers eventually brought him to England in a coffin at the beginning of the 18th century and bought a home for him in the West End. His unholy resting place is Highgate Cemetery. This is what he believes. He thinks it's there.
You know what's really unbelievable about that to me? Is that King Vampire, who is a king of vampires, has to commute to his bed every night or day. That's stupid. They bought this house for him, and they didn't even think to put a coffin down in the basement for him to sleep in? These are terrible friends.
He needs better familiars.
He does. He needs to fire all his vampire friends and his familiars, because this is annoying. I would hate to have to walk to my bed, go outside and walk to my bed.
And I think according to Sean Manchester, those familiars are David Farrant and his coven. I'm pretty sure.
Wow.
Now, Manchester intended to deal with the vampire in what he called the traditional and approved manner. And that was this, quote, "Drive a stake through its heart with one blow just after dawn between Friday and Saturday. Chop off its head with a gravedigger's shovel and burn the remains. This is what the clergy did centuries ago."
Great.
That's what he intends to do.
That's what he's going to do. Okay.
Meanwhile, David Farrant was preparing his own strategy. Concerned about his encounter, he saw something that hypnotized him in the graveyard. He and his coven vowed to use their magical rituals to banish the vampire for good. So Farrant is coming at it as, all right, we're going to use our occult practices and we are going to banish that evil force together. And because this story is not ridiculous enough yet, Sean Manchester and David Farrant both chose Friday, March 13th as the date of their final showdown with the alleged menace. And it's with their climactic battle and the truth of the Highgate Vampire that we will conclude our series next time.
Ooh, so the opposing forces are walking up to the cemetery.
Yes. Yeah,
right
in slow motion.
Bell bottoms.
Right? Yeah. Totally, yeah. Yeah.
Right? High collars.
Well, so yeah, you have David Farrant. He's got this like double-breasted trench coat that you see him wear all the time, right?
Yeah, it's pretty cool.
And then Sean Manchester is very traditional. I don't know what the collar, right? The British collar with the little white patch. He's got his long coat.
Yeah.
So, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Very cool. This all could have been solved if they just communicated to each other. Like all problems, like they just communicated. If Manchester was like, David Farrant, you're bad. You're bringing the king vampire up. And David Farrant says, no, I'm not bad. I'm not bringing the vampire up. I'm trying to stop the vampire. Oh, me too. Oh, well then let's work together. It's just communication.
It would be amazing if that happened, but there was no way that was ever going to happen. Manchester was convinced that David Farrant was bad. And David Farrant was convinced that Manchester was telling lies, basically. One of them was more right than the other.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, it wouldn't have made a good story if they had just kind of worked together.
And this is true, and this story is incredible. It's really incredible. But yeah, I mean, we're going to see their interaction here, and then we are going to see a real feud develop between them as a result of that.
Cool.
That will be the topic of our next and final episode in the series. So,
very, very cool.
Yeah.
All right.
It's such a cool story. It's so cool. The people, sometimes you just bump into these characters who are so bigger than life. And they're both like that, dude. Yeah. Remember David Farrant, they call him Birdman because he's got the bird riding around on his shoulder too. And you can't make this shit up, man.
No.
You know?
These guys are really interesting figures.
David Farrant was such an important figure in occultism at the time that he actually had a character based on him put in one of the subsequent Dracula movies.
Cool.
Yeah.
Wow. What an honor.
I don't believe that there was ever a Sean Manchester character in any of the movies.
Well, I think Sean Manchester lives on in every Ghost Adventures episode where they bring those weird exorcists in.
He's just like that, man. He's so weird.
Oh my goodness.
And also, he's very, very fond of seeking out people who say negative things about him and then also saying negative things about them and trying to take them down and stuff. So, Sean Manchester, I'm here for you, I guess. Yeah.
Well,
I wish him the best. As far as I know, he is still alive. David Farrant is no longer alive. Sean Manchester, I think, is still alive.
Okay.
So I wish him the best, but I think that he is fundamentally wrong about everything that happens.
No, that's okay. Yeah. I mean, just people are going to think what they want to think.
It's true.
If I went after every single person that didn't like me for whatever reason, I'd be so busy. I would never be able to live my life and be happy.
I think that might be why Sean Manchester has so many blogs.
Very cool.
In the darkness there. I really think it's hilarious that you were like, the owl got the fox right away. Can't pull one over on you, EJ.
No, you can't, man. I'm too fast. Too quick. Well, I'm grateful to these two guys. That's a fun story.
It's a great story.
Yeah.
Yes,
it's a very
it's a
fun
great story. I think it's an appropriate time. There's a adaptation of Nosferatu that's hitting theaters very soon. So
cool.
It feels appropriate for that. So, yep. Well, thank you all so much for listening.
Yeah, thanks for listening, everybody. Yeah. Just be careful wandering around cemeteries.
This is good advice no matter what.
Yeah.
Yeah, could be open graves. Could be foxes. Could be owls hunting foxes.
Yep. Keep your wits about you.
Keep your wits about you. And yeah, we will talk to you next time.
Alrighty then.
Be safe out there.
Bye.
Thanks for listening to Slaying Monsters, the Paranormal History Podcast. If you like the podcast, there's a couple ways to show your support. You can tell your friends, you can leave us a rating and review on your podcast platform, or you can head over to slayingmonsterspodcast.com and click on the Support Us button to leave a donation. For questions, suggestions, and other feedback, reach out to us, slayingmonsterspodcast@gmail.com, and stay up to date by following us on Instagram @slayingmonsterspodcast. Your support helps us grow, and we are truly grateful to have our listeners and community.